In this lesson, we are going to determine if a pair of lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. So, the definition of parallel lines are lines that never intersect. Algebraically, we can know that two lines are parallel if they have the same slope. For example, if we have the equation y equals 2x plus 1 and y equals 2x minus 7, we know that both of these lines have a slope of 2 and they have different y-intercepts. So they're definitely two different lines, but they will be parallel. We know from geometry that perpendicular lines are lines that intersect at right angles or 90-degree angles. But how do we know algebraically if two lines are perpendicular? Well, once again, we can rely on slopes. Slopes of perpendicular lines will have negative reciprocal slopes, or you might think of it as opposite reciprocal slopes. In order for lines to be perpendicular, one of the slopes will have to be positive and the other would have to be negative. Also, they would have to be reciprocals of each other. Do you remember what a reciprocal is? A reciprocal is a fraction turned upside down. So the reciprocal of 5 over 3 is 3 over 5. If you have a whole number like the number 2, you can think about that as being 2 over 1. So the reciprocal of 2 over 1 is 1 over 2. So the reciprocal of 2 is just 1 over 2. Now, and you see in my example, the first line has a slope of 2, and the second line has a slope of negative 1/2. Certainly, they are opposite signs. One of the slopes is positive, one of the slopes is negative, and 2 and 1/2 are reciprocals just as we have discussed. So when you see this situation, you know that the two lines are perpendicular. So here we are reviewing again what are negative reciprocals. It's very important that you're able to recognize them. So remember that a reciprocal is just a fraction flipped upside down. And then when it says negative reciprocals or opposite reciprocals, it just means that the signs are switched. One has to be positive and one has to be negative. So let's look at some examples just to make sure that we're able to recognize negative reciprocal slopes. Let's say you're given 3/4 as one of your slopes. Well, the negative reciprocal of 3/4 is negative 4 over 3. Again, since 3/4 is positive, then we make the next one negative, and then we just flip the fraction upside down. As we looked at in our previous example, the negative reciprocal of 2 is negative 1 over 2. That's because a whole number can be written as a fraction over 1. In example 3, we have the fraction negative 7/8. So my negative reciprocal would be positive 8/7. In number 4, we have the slope of 1. The negative reciprocal of positive 1 is negative 1 over 1, which is just negative 1. Number 5 is an interesting example because we have a slope of 0. Remember, a slope of 0 is a horizontal line. The only kind of line that is perpendicular to a horizontal line is a vertical line, and that slope would be undefined. If you think about 0 being a fraction, 0 over 1, when you flip it upside down, it becomes 1 over 0, which is not okay Remember, it's never okay to have 0 as the denominator in a fraction. And that's why the reciprocal of 0 is undefined. Let's look at some examples. Feel free to pause the video if you would like to so you can jot down the examples. I want you to notice that in each of these, we are actually using the slope formula to determine the slope of each line. So we have in each of these examples one line called line AB, or a segment, and we have another segment called CD. And we're given 2 points on the line segment, and we need to find the slope because that's how we're going to determine if they're parallel or perpendicular, or maybe they just intersect at some other angle that's not a 90-degree angle. If you had a piece of graph paper and a pencil, you could certainly plot the points, draw the lines, and visually determine if you think the lines are parallel or perpendicular or not. But it's actually just as easy to use the slope formula. Remember, the slope formula is m equals y sub 2 minus y sub 1 divided by x sub 2 minus x sub 1. So just be super careful plugging in the numbers into the formula correctly, and we find that the slope of AB is 3/4. We do the same thing with the second line, CD, plugging in the points into the slope equation. We find that the slope of the second line is also 3/4. So when you get the same slope, your lines will be parallel. So you're simply going to determine in each of the cases if the lines are parallel or perpendicular or neither. Let's look at example 2. In the first line, AB, we find by plugging in the numbers into the slope formula that the slope is 2/5. Using the same process in the second line, we find that the slope of the second line is negative 5/2. I hope you recognize that those are negative reciprocals of each other. One of the slopes is positive, one of the slopes is negative, and they are reciprocals or flipped fractions. So these two segments would be perpendicular, meaning that when you draw them, they would cross at a perfect 90-degree angle. Let's look at example 3 and 4. When we find the slope of these two segments, we get two completely different values, negative 2/3 and positive 1/4. While they are negatives of each other, they're certainly not reciprocals. So we would say that these two segments are neither parallel nor perpendicular. What that means is if we were to draw these segments, they would intersect each other, but it wouldn't be at a 90-degree angle. It might be at a 20-degree angle or some other type of angle. In number 4, we see that we end up with perpendicular lines. Line segment AB has a slope of negative 1/3. Remember, when the negative sign is in the denominator, it means the same thing as if the negative sign were in the numerator or simply out to the side of the fraction. If you end up with a negative sign in the numerator and the denominator, those are going to cancel each other out and make for a positive fraction. So be super careful about that. You also need to make sure that you reduce all fractions. Otherwise, you may not be able to compare them properly. Use your technology, your Desmos calculator or your Inspire calculator to help you reduce fractions. And if you don't know how to do that, please be sure and ask. So in number 4, negative 1/3 and positive 3, which you can think of as 3 over 1, are negative reciprocals, and number 4 creates perpendicular lines. We have a few more examples that you can take a look at. Number 5 is interesting because of the results that we get. Of course, if you would like to pause and copy down these examples, I think that would be a wise to do. And then you can resume whenever you've finished and take a look at what's happening here, because these are some interesting examples. Notice in number 5, when you find the slope of AB, you get a 0 in the denominator. Remember, that means that you have a vertical line with an undefined slope. This line is straight up and down like a telephone pole. But when you find the slope of the second line, CD, you get a 0 in the numerator. And 0 divided by some other number that's not also 0 is always equal to 0. If you find that you're getting that rule mixed up, just use your calculator and it will let you know. So, a line that has a slope of 0 is a horizontal line, flat like the floor. And when you have a vertical line and a horizontal line, or an undefined slope and a slope of 0, those two lines will certainly be perpendicular. In number 6, we get equal slopes, exactly equal. -1/2 and -1/2. If you got -1/2 and +1/2, those would not be parallel, nor would they be perpendicular, because you have to have negatives and the reciprocal in order to be perpendicular. In example 7, you get undefined slopes, or 0 in the denominator, for both segments. That means that both of these lines are vertical, like telephone poles, which means that they are parallel to each other. In number 8, you get one slope is -1 and one slope is +1. If you were to write -1 as a fraction, you would write -1 over 1. Well, when you flip it upside down, it's still going to be 1 over 1. So the negative reciprocal of -1 is simply +1. So in number 8, you have a set of perpendicular lines. Remember that two lines could be parallel, same slope, or perpendicular, negative reciprocal slopes, or neither. And that's where the slopes aren't the same, nor are they negative reciprocals.